Hey gang, it's Rob Tiffany for your IoT Minute. Today I just want to talk about a surefire recipe for disaster when it comes to IoT. There's no shortage of people who get caught up in all the hype of this IoT megatrend. While it's an evolution of M2M, a lot of people think it's came from outer space and is going to change the world and all that stuff. And maybe it will. So for the last several years, lots of people were reading articles, executives read something on the plane, the usual deal. They come back, hey, we got to do an IoT thing. Obviously, all the system integrators, all the major global SIs have jumped into this. They've created IoT practices. Everybody wants to do an IoT project. Doing an IoT project is your recipe for disaster. Whenever this idea of this generic, hey, let's do an IoT POC, proof of concept. Let's do an IoT pilot. Let's do something like that. Let's try, invariably, these pilots, these POCs, they end up being all about the technology, some kind of IoT technology from whatever IoT vendor. And, as we've talked about in the past, there are hundreds of these platform vendors, people making all kinds of things that are in the whole value chain of IoT. And so you go off and you do some kind of generic pilot based on some IoT technology, a cloud thing, a device thing, a wireless thing, whatever it happens to be. And then they just kind of stay in that phase forever. Right now, so far, I've talked about this in the past. I did my session on our kind of failure to launch with IoT. We're stuck. There's zillions of POCs going on, and then there's not a lot of progression beyond that. So how do we fix this problem? Well, let me tell you, you need to stop talking about IoT when it comes to doing these projects, and you need to frame it very narrowly, and you need to talk about specifically what the value is. What is it you're really trying to accomplish? And leave IoT out of it. Leave all the technology, all the gadgets, all the fun stuff out of it, okay? So what do I mean by that? Let me give you some examples to frame this. Let's talk about something with cities, smart cities. I'm going to talk about something that maybe is not as sexy as wiring up all the traffic lights and making cars get around town faster, or all the usual suspects you hear at smart cities. Let's talk about the Department of Transportation for your state or wherever you live, and they do inspections. This is part of a smart city, smart state, province, whatever it is. They need to do inspections on bridges and roads and things like that, and they're checking for cracks. Where I live in Seattle, they're checking for things to make sure, from whatever the last earthquake happened to be, that, a particular bridge isn't going to collapse. And so there's all kinds of inspections that goes on. And this is part in that envelope of that whole smart city world. Well, using IoT for that kind of stuff, could be cameras looking at bridges and roads, looking for cracks. Could be sensors connected to that. In many cases, it could be drones. You may have to have drones. There might be some hard to get places that you need to inspect remotely. So you might have to use drones with cameras to fly around there. But the takeaway here, though, is, again, instead of always rolling a truck, sending someone out to do a typical inspection and getting in close, writing down their findings, going back to the office, transcribing that into a system, you're using kind of what we think of as remote monitoring, in IoT. I'm just remotely knowing something. I'm not talking about anything crazy here, not AI, not machine learning, just remotely knowing, because that's super important. So there's some great stuff there. So talk about a project like that, just remote inspection. I'm going to be looking at it, I'm going to capture it, and I'm going to know it remotely. If I want to streamline things, I've talked about how we live in a world of gauges. There's factories and plants and refineries and places all over the place where you send people locally, or they drive in a car a long distance to go check something, or they fly somewhere and they walk around and they have a clipboard and they're checking gauges and they're writing down those values and then reading back. Don't frame that as an IoT project. Just say, hey, I'm going to increase your efficiency. I might reduce labor costs. I'm going to increase accuracy on knowing the status of all these things, that you typically do logging on and checking gauges. I'm going to use cameras now to look at those gauges. And either my cameras are smart enough to detect from analog to digital what it means, or I'm going to replace those gauges with sensors that are going to send telemetry wirelessly. Or maybe I'll do something really simple but still effective. Maybe I'll point a webcam at those gauges and I'll have some guy looking from their desk to see what's going on remotely. Anyway, position it as that. I guess that's my takeaway over and over again here. Talk about the actual solution, talk about what's the benefit. I'm going to reduce labor costs. I'm going to increase accuracy in capturing information. I'm going to reduce unplanned downtime on machines in my factory. I'm going to increase uptime. Stick to those kinds of verbiage. Keep it narrow, keep it focused so that you make sure that your proof of concept gets a quick win. And it's not about the technology, and it's not about showing off whatever cool stuff the vendor has. IoT is not rocket science. You're grabbing data from someplace and you're sending it somewhere else and you're doing something with it. It's that simple. So please don't overthink IoT. Keep it simple, stick to the use cases, keep them narrow, and get those quick wins. I'm out.